I'm Jean Van Cinderlaw, Associate Vice President at University College Cork, and I've responsibility for European relations and public affairs. And I am the PI on UNIC, which is the European University of Post-Industrial Cities, which is this wonderful alliance of 10 universities, including our friends here on screen in Bilbao and in Malmo, 10 universities funded through the Erasmus Plus European Universities Initiative Programme to literally lead out as one of the 44 alliances that have been successful on the future of the European higher education area and the future of the European research area. UNIC is unique in the fact that it is 10 universities and their 10 cities. So 20 entities working together horizontally and vertically. And therefore the unique selling point of the unique European University of Post-Industrial Cities is that connectivity with the city. And it is also through a super diversity lens, ensuring equality, diversity, and inclusion of all. This event is run as part of the Cork Harbour Festival in conjunction with Mehel Mara, who play a pivotal role in ensuring that the Cork Harbour Festival is the success that it is. So this is a partnership between University College Cork and Cork Harbour Festival and Mehel Mara. And it's organised through UNIC, the European University of Post-Industrial Cities, of which University College Cork is a member, as is Deusto in Bilbao and Malmo. And it is specifically the UNIC European University CityLabs entity, which is spearheaded by Dr. Martin Galvin here in Cork and Dr. Ciara O'Halloran. Most member cities of the UNIC consortium are actually also port cities, which makes this a very relevant theme for us. And UCC is also a member of the Port Cities Universities League. So Port Cities Universities League, which is a global league of 19 universities across the world, headquartered in Yokohama National University. A shared ambition of the festival, of these types of festivals and networks, is engagement, exchange, and collaboration between universities, the cities, and the city stakeholders, locally and across Europe, and indeed globally, because we're all connected globally. The Future of Port Cities seminar series aims to rethink, reimagine, and co-create the possibilities for the future of port cities in a citizen-centered, inclusive, and ecological manner. And through this, we stress the importance of learning and ideas exchange globally and locally, engaging with citizens, and working together for sustainable futures in ways that reflect the diversity of our cities. Cork is a very exciting city, and it would be remiss of me not to talk a little bit just about Cork for a moment, but we are a vibrant, diverse, have a very vibrant and diverse arts and culture scene in the city, making it a hub of creativity and artistic expression. We're known locally as the Rebel City due to our rich history and independent spirit. And we offer a whole range of cultural experiences, from traditional to contemporary art forms, across the visual arts, performing arts, music, literature, festivals, and street art and graffiti, which is also something that's very significant when you come to Cork, and that is obvious to you. We also pride ourselves on trying to see the world through a creative and artistic lens. And it is in this context today that I think we are very well placed as a city and as a university, which is focused on the absolute pivotal role that creativity and design thinking and artistic thinking, when brought to all disciplines, can actually create very exciting and new futures. So it is with great pleasure that on behalf of University College Cork, Ireland's leading research university, one of the top universities in the world in terms of green metrics, we have an absolute commitment to sustainability and have played a pivotal leadership role in sustainability. We are also world leaders in things which relate to the marine, for example, wind energy and wave energy. And as I said, going back to our commitment to sustainability, we are very, very keen on working in partnership with our city, our port city, in ensuring that this can become a beacon for sustainability, a collaboration between the university, the city, its citizens, including enterprise. So without further ado, I deem this webinar open and welcome you all to the Future of Port City Seminar, Arts, Culture and Creativity in Docklands Regeneration. Over the course of the next few minutes, and the next, let's say, few minutes indeed, I will introduce the panelists in turn, and each of the panelists will deliver a contribution for about 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, I will interject and we will conclude that and move on to our next panelists. And then at the end, we will have I don't like to call it a questions and answers because none of us deem to know the answer to anything, but we all have points of view relating to things. We've comments and contributions. And I'd like this to be an exchange of ideas, as we said earlier, an opportunity to learn from each other. And imagine at the beginning of this, that you will take away one learning. If you take away one learning from the next hour and a half, this will have been an hour and a half very worthwhile spending. So our first panelists who are going to speak about the Bauhaus of the Seas are Lynn Johansson from the Marine Knowledge Centre, an educator, nature guide in marine education, and Anna Schroeder, a doctoral student in interaction design at Malmö University, Faculty of Culture and Communication, School of Arts and Communication at Malmö. So Anna and Lynn, I very much welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I will share my screen.
Okay,
right.
Do you see it?
Yes, no problem.
Good. Okay, so thank you so much. And just like you said, I'm Lynn Johansson, a marine pedagogue and nature guide at the Marine Education Center located here in Malmö. And what we do is that we aim to increase ocean literacy through marine educational activities and water activities, where we invite schools and also the public.
And I'll also repeat what has been said a little bit. My name is Anna Schröder. I'm a PhD student at the School of Arts and Communication at Malmö University, and I work at the intersection of participatory design and ocean literacy, where I research new methods to design sustainable futures that can support life with the ocean within planetary boundaries.
And like we've already said, we're both based here in Sweden, in Malmö, which is a former industrial port city. Where you can see here on the pictures, we have very deep and also, unfortunately, dead basins remaining from the years of Kockums shipyard. And the challenge that Malmö poses is to create a vibrant and sustainable district here, where the urban development takes place, following the UN Agenda 2030. So the city of Malmö has already started the constructing process of this area, where we are recreating these basins one by one to become shallow areas, just like they were 200 years ago. And we are applying nature-based solutions. So what we do is actually that Malmö is bringing the ocean back into the city. By shallowing up these basins, the blue biodiversity will increase, and this will actually be a new home for eelgrass, blue mussels, and algae.
Yes, and as part of this bigger mission of the city in Malmö, the university, Malmö University, then the Marine Education Center, and the Forum for Social Innovation have joined forces to establish Malmö's local working group of the Bauhaus of the Seas Sails project, which we always refer to as BOSS, because it's much shorter. BOSS is one of the EU lighthouse projects in the bigger frame of the new European Bauhaus program, and explores how a different relationship between people and the sea can be created. In total, there are 17 actors in 7 different EU locations. So there's colleagues working in Portugal, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and in Sweden. And we're all working since the beginning of 2023 until 2026. And Lynn and I, we are part of a team of 5 more colleagues here in Malmö for the local team.
And the work within the Bauhaus of the Seas project is guided by 4 principles. These are to be sustainable, inclusive, aesthetic, and locally grounded. And in this local group in Malmö, this means that we aim for participation in culture-led initiatives to involve and invite different groups in society in imagining and developing new ways of living that embrace the interdependence between human and the sea. And we see those principles play out on scales that each local projects aim to move forwards on and away from, for example, seeing the sea only as a resource or top-down solutions.
And in practice, the whole project will later on consist of culture-led, innovative and participatory initiatives that are called drops within Bauhaus of the Seas. And those drops basically respond to site-specific challenges and consist of concrete activities and experiments that engage communities at the places. Such a drop could, for example, be a craft-based exploration, as you can see here in the pictures, where the local flora and fauna is explored by gathering seaweed and then making prints out of them with a diverse audience. And these several drop activities that will happen then serve as kind of prototypes for something we call Ocean Culture Hub, which is the planned final outcome of the BOSS project here in Malmö. And whatever shape this Ocean Culture Hub might take, it is supposed to become a center for meetings, residencies, workshops, and so on, that then is closely connected to the South Wharf Basin and the developments in Malmö, together with a network of actors and organizations involved in the project. And the way that BOSS works in all local groups is that each local team, so here in the middle, is currently setting up an operative group around them, which is called the Sea Forum, so a bigger group around the local team. And the Sea Forum consists of experts on local nature, experts on communities to involve, and local institutions from the cultural scene that can then steer the project and support the Ocean Hub and the drops in the long run. And this group, the Sea Forum, then invites ocean ambassadors into the project, so members of local communities who are then realizing the actual activities.
So with the early stages of the project, our current challenges come from the 4 principles that I mentioned earlier and how to translate them into the local context in Malmö. So those are sustainable. How can we create well-being for both people and marine life here in Malmö? And participation, how can we promote meetings between different groups and communities in Malmö who don't usually meet? And aesthetics, how can we use cultural and creative activities to promote new relations or encounters between all residents in Malmö? So that will be both human and the life in the sea. And locally anchored, how can we create synergies with various long-term processes? For example, the regeneration of the harbour basins. And how can this happen between established platforms or arenas like Marine Education Center and local museums? And how can new actors come in, for example, smaller cultural actors? And this project has just started and we are super excited to see where it goes. I mean, we're exploring and we are actually meeting up with our Sea Forum this afternoon. So we see how it goes. And we are looking forward to discussing your questions later on. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you both very, very much. That was very interesting. And I was picking up on some, I mean, as I said earlier, the concept of ocean literacy is very nice. And we might explore that a little further and give us a sense of how that's evolving. Also, the fact, you know, the aesthetic is very important in the concept that you're developing. And you spoke a lot about engaging, you know, the Sea Forum And obviously having people working together is key. And how do you engage with these communities? And how do you get people interested? And we might come back to that, because that's something that is a challenge and an opportunity for all of us. And you spoke about the regeneration of the harbour basins. I'd be interested to hear down the line what's the starting point. In other words, how run down were the harbour basins? And that's obviously as a result of maritime transport and even pollution and so on. But you might just refer to that later on in the questioning. So I think at this juncture, unless there's any very pressing question for Anna and Lynn, we might progress. Has anybody anything they want to say at this juncture? But we will have an opportunity of drawing the whole lot together towards the latter part of this webinar. Okay, well, based on that, we will move on. And it gives me great pleasure now, first of all, to thank our previous speakers and to invite Karim Asri, Creative Director at Espacio Open in Bilbao. That's an independent fab lab, and you'll explain that to us, Karim, in Bilbao, Spain, based in an old cookie factory that mixes maker culture with social projects, traditional industries, and urban culture as a learning environment. Karim has been an organizer since 2013 of Maker Fair Bilbao and non-formal education for youngsters project Gaztea Tech. He's a board member at the Spanish Network for Digital Creation and Fabrication called CREFAB, and a former journalist at El País and pardon for the pronunciation, and ex-Open Government and Transparency Advisor for the presidency of the Basque Regional Government. So, Karim, it is with great pleasure that I invite you to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And let's share screen and tell you a little bit, how did we get into this specific moment and what can we contribute to this conversation about post-industrial areas near the sea. The place where I'm talking to you from is the old cookie factory. This is the garden. And just 5 meters away, I have the Nervión River. That was kind of like the internet before the internet of Bilbao. It was the place where our goods were shipped, where ideas were coming and going. And it is not random that a lot of emerging cultural spaces like ours actually are built on the outskirts and the ruins of post-industrial society. So there's already this 20th century tradition where artists, designers, or makers try to repurpose emblematic places that have a huge potential because of their architectural properties, but also because of the emotional memory that is treasured in these buildings. So an old cookie factory is definitely something that speaks to the citizens of Bilbao. A lot of them remember when they were younger to come here and buy the broken cookies by the pound. And so what we did in the last decade basically is try to create a proof of concept of what happens when you allow people to create their own community gathering spaces, non-standardized, with new approaches, with frugal innovation. But what I can tell you is that probably a lot of the answers that we need to figure out to how to make more thrivant, inclusive, and beautiful cities have to do with the idea that we need to create spaces for the non-conventional and non-standardized to happen. And in this case, the space in Bilbao was this peninsula, now an island, called Sorrosaure, that was basically an extension of the port during the 20th century. Just to give you some context, Bilbao and the Basque Country in general was a little bit kind of like the Silicon Valley of metal. We had a lot of iron to mine. When the British started mining the iron, well, the local crafts had early access to the technology of transforming the iron and all type of metals into consumer products, and that kind of gave the little edge that Bilbao and the Basque Country have in manufacturing and in industry. But that edge, of course, started entering an industrial decay that happened in all over the West when we started delocalizing all our productions to Asia. And so all these huge factories, warehouses, well, we're in a very difficult situation. And the master plan made by Zaha Hadid, the Iraqi architect, a few decades ago, was thinking of transforming this whole island into this place that could become a new kind of Manhattan for the city. Now, the reality is that we're not that much of a Manhattan. You could say that it's more of a Brooklyn thing, Bilbao, Sorrosaure. But what's interesting is that a lot of parts of the soul of the city that didn't have space to go started finding their spaces here. So these are some images of what used to happen in this emblematic building. And another interesting thing is that most of the workforce were women. 80% of the people working in the factory were women that didn't want to settle with a conventional life and marry somebody from their village. So what they would do is move to Bilbao and become a galletera, a cookie maker. So, and it played a huge role in the collective imaginary, both giving women opportunity to be independently, but also as a place, you know, cookies and dreams and fun are things that are strongly interrelated. And we kind of played with that idea. Now you can see some pictures of the events that happen in the cookie factory. We work at the intersection between art, technology, and social issues. We try to give access to things that, if we were not here, would have taken years or decades to get to the mainstream audience. So we teach people how to make robots. The robot that you see in the picture is a 3D printed, open source, human size humanoid made not by a technologist, but by an artist. Gaël Langevin, he's a Paris sculptor. He knew a lot about the human body. And so he got involved in digital fabrication. And when he realized he could put all his knowledge about the human body into something that people could share, well, he made not only a robot, but also a platform for people to learn how to make their own robots. So this InMov platform now has allowed hundreds of universities, students groups, but also aficionados to learn how to make their own mechanical and electronic motion robots. We also do a lot of gathering events around do-it-yourself culture, and we also do a lot of things around circular economy. Actually, our project started with something that didn't have nothing to do with technology. We started with a very small flea market, a secret among friends. Circularity is becoming also an art form on itself, because artists are very good at seeing the cracks on the walls, and when there's a need, there's a potential for artists and for new types of gathering to explore that thing. So we started with that flea market, and the attention started growing. And what started as a secret among friends became one of the most visited places on the Sunday. And then when we had 3,000 people showing up every Sunday of the month, we started saying, okay, what are we going to do with all this potential? No, what can we do? What does the city need? And we didn't have all the answers, but what we realized is that we needed to help other emerging cultures that didn't have a space together to create their own meeting point, and to extend the circle by creating these meeting points, because cultural movements need a place where you can experience them, you know, that can incarnate them, and a place where the knowledge and the torch can be passed on to the next generations. One of the things that we're very proud of is this decade-long festival that we've done, Maker Faire Bilbao. This started in California 2 decades ago. And it's basically a place where we learn not only to be consumers of stuff, but also makers. We teach family-friendly audiences, from kids to grown-ups, how to learn electronics, how to learn digital fabrication, but also traditional crafts like woodworking or textiles. We also have a specific facility that is called a Fab Lab. A Fab Lab, if you don't know, is basically a tools workshop, a community workshop, where you have access to tools, expertise, and where you build up the confidence so that you can feel that you can make your own stuff. And the only particularity is that the Fab Lab network is managed through an organization linked to the MIT in Massachusetts that was the first founder of a Fab Lab. And as you can see, we teach different type of techniques. We can teach programming. We can teach how to make your own emergency PPE. The image that you see on the right, on the far right, is also a good example of the resilience that these spaces can have. We repurposed our whole Fab Lab in 24 hours into an emergency PPE equipment during the COVID lockdown. And 2 days after we started, we were coordinating a manufacturing supply chain that included companies, other art spaces, but also individuals that from one day to the next became the largest emergency PPE supplier in the area. And it's interesting because this happened at the same time globally. The maker movement and the Fab Labs became overnight the largest emergency PPE manufacturer in the world. So this capacity of resilience that these new spaces have was proven and tested during the COVID pandemic. It also made us be more radical about the things that we think work and don't work. And it also made us think that we have a undisclosed yet role in both how we relate to physical objects, how do we consume and how do we manufacture, but also how do we create spaces that could react in case of emergencies that were so uncertain, like the one that we had with the COVID. We're also involved in European research. We are involved in an Horizon 2020 project on the use of new participatory approaches and grassroots innovation and everything related with this concept of temporary use. So the project is having 6 pilot cities. Bilbao is one of them, Amsterdam, London, Kaunas in Lithuania, and Milan are the other ones. And what we're doing is we're trying to make proofs of concept of new both public and private services that could take advantage of the time factor. You know, when you're talking about how can we make our cities, and especially the Dockland type of spaces more aligned with the future, well, my answer is don't try to figure everything out beforehand, because if you try to do that, what's going to happen is that you're going to limit the capacity for the future to tell you exactly what you need to do. And another thing that we're trying to research upon is what can we do to allow the emerging talents of a local community to thrive? How can we make ladders of progress so that a project that starts as a small grassroots grant that gets from an art project in a space like ours can go through that ladder of progress and eventually become a cultural institution and a creative lung on the city. So if you're interested in everything related with this research, you can check out our website. And in general, I would tell you that we need to rethink very radically the way we are planifying and making the city. We are just putting buildings one next to the other that then we don't know how to fill up with content. We have the issues that the cities that were a human invention made to actually create progress and inclusivity are becoming engines of exclusion. We have a lot of very complex and multi-layered issues that probably are not that easy to solve. But what I can tell you is from our decade experience is that magic happens when you detect people that are already doing meaningful things and you try to help them to become the best persons and the best organizations they can be. We were lucky that we made it this far. We think that there's a room for urban planning and for urban regeneration to leave some blank spaces for testing and allowing new emerging uses to pre-configure what's going to happen. And whatever we want to do, we like to say that our slogan tries to align the 3 times that we try to intervene. So we try to preserve the past, prototype the future, and enjoy the present, because revolution also has to be fun or it won't be revolution at all. And I think I'm a bit on the time, so I would thank everybody and open and looking forward to the discussion afterwards.
Thank you very much, Karim. That was really interesting. So many things that I've been kind of noting as you've been speaking, which we hopefully will come back to. Obviously, you talk about people and place, and you talk very strongly about place and space, providing spaces for things to happen. The concept of incorporating blank spaces, urban planners to consider blank spaces, as we call it, for the future, and then let that be the conduit or the enabler for things to happen is quite a concept. We will come back to it in the questions, so you might note it, you might refer to it later. You spoke about we, so this is very successful. What you've just explained is very successful. And I think here collectively, we're very interested in understanding who the we are. In other words, for good things to happen, we need leadership, we need commitment, and how does that work? You also mentioned, I was quite taken by it, by memory. And even when I was looking at the images there in the cookie factory, what was very nice was the shapes of the cookies and the impressions on them were indeed works of art in themselves. It was just a beautiful image there at one point, but that concept of memory, and which means when you create something new, you know, if you take a greenfield site, sometimes you need the connection, maybe, and let's talk about that. Do you need the connection, passing down the baton, like they speak with, they talk about folklore, you know, the stories of the people passed on from one to the other. So yeah, spaces for non-conventional and non-standard things to happen. So Karim, I think you've most definitely created that, and thank you very much for your contribution. And now it brings me to the last contribution, and then before we open up for our, you know, there are lots of I'll call it questions, ideas that we'd like to explore here. And I think that we have such experts that we'll be able to cover a lot of ground. So our final speaker this morning is my esteemed colleague, Dr. Yvonne Bonenfant, who's head of the Department of Theatre here at University College Cork and visiting professor of research at the University of Winchester. Yvonne is an artist researcher with a focus on the voice, sensation, tactility, and inclusion of different kinds of voices and bodies in culture. He's involved in the emerging field of interdisciplinary voice studies and is indeed an expert on innovative approaches to practice inclusive research methodologies in artistic research, especially where the voice or interdisciplinary collaboration are concerned. In 2017 and 2018, his works as an individual artist and with his spin-off charity Tract and Touch reached more than 220,000 users across different registers of the senses, sometimes visually, sometimes through sound, and sometimes through touch. Yvonne's work has been funded by all sorts of funding agencies, the Irish Research Council, of course, the Arts Council of England, the Wellcome Trust, the UK Arts and Humanities Research Council, the British Academy, Youth Music and Postcode Community Trust. So Yvonne is a key participant in UNIC here in UCC and is very much driving the theme of arts and culture, for which we have included in our submission for the next tranche of funding, which we hope will be successful. And I think over to Yvonne to explain, what your concept relation to that is, and then of course the presentation that you're about to make, Yvonne. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for the really kind introduction, Jean, and the lovely bio. As my work focuses so much on physical contact, it goes without saying that numbers of users plummeted dramatically during the COVID crisis. So things are different now than they were before that time. But that's part of the question that we're exploring right now, which is really around thinking about the place of not just arts practices, but artistic thinking in where Cork's structuring of its ideas around Docklands regeneration might go. And I'm really delighted to be in the company of these thinkers from Malmö and Bilbao, who are really proposing and have realized already aspects of really exciting ways of thinking about where artistic thinking situates itself inside what cities need to do now with these port spaces. So I might just give the presentation, and We'll come back to the artistic thinking notions during the presentation. Just bear with me while I pull up the PowerPoint.
No problem.
Right, and you should have it there. And I'll start.
Yes, we have.
Great. So, you know, Cork is at the beginning of thinking about what Cork would like to do with its Docklands regeneration. And as Jean has pointed out, there is a really exciting thinking around this enormous regeneration space, many, many acres or hectares of space that Cork City is planning to regenerate, and one of the largest urban redevelopment projects of its kind in Ireland has ever been undertaken. And it's so interesting to consider how these port spaces might face their futures in a time when sea levels are rising, and what that means for all of us to think through in terms of the challenges we face. I think it's really interesting in the ways that our previous presenters have really, our previous presenters have highlighted the ways that their own cities are trying to address bits of this agenda. And I think Cork's cultural effervescence is really without question. In a 2017 Eurobarometer survey, Cork was assessed as being the city of its size, in its size category, with the highest density of cultural activity across the European Union. And that's a really impressive feat, given that state funding to state institutions for the arts is configured very differently in Ireland than in some other locations. So Cork had a higher density of activity than places like Innsbruck or Salzburg, with a very different level of and configuration of state support to the arts. And so it's really exciting to think of how popular culture engages with artistic being in ways that ignite dialogue and draw people out into the streets and into venues to really consume and talk about culture in exciting ways. Just a moment. Just having some drama with my PowerPoint. On that note, Cork City has launched its own art strategy 2022 to 26 with 4 strategic priorities: arts for everyone, and you see that they've imagined their goals in the past tense. So they're talking about what they would have achieved by 2026, that they have encouraged and enabled more people across our communities to access and enjoy art, that there will be optimized space for art, that art in the public realm will take an enhanced place inside the strategy. And I think really critically, in a city and country with an ongoing housing crisis, real thinking about where artists live and the conditions that make it possible for artists to work. And we can't forget, as has always already been pointed out, that often port spaces, disused spaces, spaces slated for regeneration, are the only spaces where artists can afford to have studios, or where artists can get their hands on slightly disused property at lower rents in order to be able to do more groundbreaking work with less financial risk to themselves. And so when we redevelop, we really need to think about where that space goes and how that space gets reconfigured so that artists can access making space again. On that note, I'm inspired by a pedagogical collaboration that we in the Department of Theatre have ongoing with the University of Rennes too, in Brittany, and their Center for Art in Public Space. The University of Rennes too is undertaking an 8-year research program, really thinking about what it means for art and public space to collide with one another, even from an intercultural perspective, right down to the notion of what public means to people and what public space means to people. For example, we discovered in one of our intercultural dialogues that in France, the feeling from the Rennes team was that people would consider a state museum to be public space. That is unlikely to be the case in many other territories, certainly not in another of our collaborating partners' territories, Portugal, where state museums were still seen to a degree as being having an arm of the old dictatorship inside the ways that they functioned. So what's construed as space for all changes so much between different places and different times. And in Ireland's post-colonial heritage, there are really important questions around how ownership of space is understood and who gets to be there. And on that note, I just borrow from the Center for Arts and Public Spaces collaboration with the Rennes and Brest youth arts organization Teenage Kicks, who really interestingly reconstruct street and graphic art as the art of vandals who become artists. And I really like the idea of the reconstruction of the vandal, someone who's defacing space, to someone who's creating space in interesting ways. And so I wonder if artistic thinking can help us bring the creative approaches of vandalism into new approaches to urban design. This raises all of those questions around what makes a space feel like one belongs there, and reconfiguring belonging. These are questions raised by the CAPS partnership. When redeveloping, how does a space offer the potential for artistic self-realization to professionals and amateurs in all age groups and marginalized voices? Where do they make the work? How do we make spaces feel like outsider voices can belong? As many of you will know here in this dialogue, there's a trans-European and global mania for statistically representing marginalized populations in urban spaces and artistic institutions. But those statistics don't address whether people feel like the institutions and spaces are theirs. They just address whether their bodies move into the spaces and out again. And I think a truly artistic approach to designing these spaces looks at what happens when people actually feel like a space belongs to them rather than when they're in it. So what do I mean by artistic thinking, and how artistic thinking could come into the dialogue around the future of the port cities and why it matters? Artistic thinking is something that we can maybe separate from design thinking, although there are aspects of artistic and design thinking that are really shared, and that we can separate from other types of inquiry in the sense that it has a few characteristics that are really interesting when we consider how we generate the unforeseen, chaos-welcoming spaces that are needed when we're trying to bring arts into the public sphere of future urban design. First of all, artistic thinking speculates. It's got an improvisatory capacity, yet it often ends off with very real and concrete solutions. When people make works of art or do R&D for works of art, whether there's a performance of their other types of art, they're often starting from a space of utter fantasy and coming up with a very concrete communicating project. And I think that way of thinking of starting from utter fantasy rather than what's already done is really important when we're addressing what we do with urban space. Artistic thinking often reconfigures the questions rather than providing answers, and proposes solutions to questions no one's yet asking, because the questions don't make sense when you're improvising and speculating. Annette Arlander, and I quote her here loosely, talks about artistic thinking knitting together the known, the unknown, the felt, the suspected, the perceived, the relational, and that it can see evidence from multiple points of views at once. That it finds idiosyncratic virtuosity in the individual and unmasks its potential to change, that there's huge relational intelligence in artistic thinking, how you manage relationships with those who aren't included. It works with instead of against the hypersubjective, and again asks this question of who feels like they're a citizen of a place, while transforming attitudes and engaging in real dialogue without pat answers, without having to solve problems with pat answers, and can help bring othered voices and smothered voices into dialogue. I'll give a concrete example of what I mean here. In one of our projects exploring the configuration of urban space that was funded by an Erasmus Plus strategic project, we were comparing urban spaces in Porto and Stockholm. And one of the very interesting things was that there was incredibly beautiful urban design in one of the locations we were examining in Stockholm. But when recently arrived migrants were asked whether the space, the public outdoor space, was theirs, the answer was universally, absolutely not. This space is for the people who are here already. There were characteristics about the aesthetics of the spatial design that simply didn't feel like those who were recently arrived migrants were invited inside the space. And when asked why, there were questions about cultural value systems, like the space is too clean, the space doesn't look like we could have a barbecue in it or a party in it, that answered really interesting questions about what makes people with different cultural value systems feel like a space is there and feel like it belongs. Who might be able to invent the kind of urban fabric and reconfigured urban space where there's barbecues can sit right alongside the dialogue or the beautifully designed inclusive space that the non-migrant population might have felt was designed for them? How do we juxtapose seeming opposites? Artists do that, and artists do that all the time. And this is where artistic thinking coming into urban design is a really interesting maybe method or methodology to bring into the picture. And I'm calling that thinking artistness, the kind of being of the artist. It goes beyond centers and productions of works. It's about thought ecology and the relational ecology of a community and how that influences social innovation. It's about who gets housed and where and in what conditions and how. Thinking about complete alternatives to housing design and how people get access to housing. It's about radical spatial and architectural solutions that ensure that different communities, individuals encounter one another, are beside each other while being allowed to maintain their distinct identities rather than through identity erasure. It's about an extreme approach to ecology and sustainability, hyper-sustainable buildings, spaces, and configurable spaces. And it's about leveraging the value of the arts and the economies of place, including out who can own and who can inhabit place and who gets to imagine its future. This can all seem like very abstruse arguments I'm making, and I am making really abstruse arguments today, really around the conceptual approach that artists might bring to the table in an urban planning scenario for Docklands regeneration. But as we regenerate them, we know that we're facing really, really dramatic social challenges right now. We're facing eco change that is massive. We're facing sea level rises. We're facing largely climate-induced migratory waves that will mean all of our culture is welcoming large numbers of new residents to where we live and moving through our spaces. And one of the ways that we can find to cope with this rapid fire change is bringing the improvisational thinking and the improvisatory capacity of artist thinking into play, these rapid fire change spaces, so that we can allow the mess of the world that's coming forward to us and the carefully designed strategies that allow mess and cleanliness to live alongside one another and rub up against one another in a productive and exciting way to coexist together. So I hope that makes some sense in a presentation like this for this morning.
Yvonne, that was very, very interesting, and definitely I can only speak for myself. I think I'm speaking on behalf of everybody, and welcome to those who've joined us since we began earlier. It makes a lot of sense. Obviously, there's some very important points in there. Again, relating, I mean, the whole concept of creative thinking, and I love an artistic thinking. I mean, when you spoke about what spaces feel like, that's a very interesting thought, and because it resonates with all of us, but yet is it incorporated into the planning of something? It's very often what it looks like, what it sounds like, how it's energy efficiency, but actually what does it feel like? And then you obviously highlighted or outlined what artistness includes, and that's really, really interesting. There's a whole lot in it. If I might, start the questioning with the following. So in the first two presentations, we heard about very specific outstanding initiatives which are happening involving communities of people and changing hearts and minds. In Yvonne's presentation, he's speaking really about what is to a certain extent in this city of Cork, but what can be. So how do you bridge the gap between what was, what is, and what can be? And you spoke about bringing people to the, so if you're a city planner and you're considering the future, regenerating the Docklands, as far as I can make out, there is no downside to incorporating the concepts that you have clearly shown, Yvonne, and that Anna, Lynn, and Karim have shown from experience work. So why doesn't more of that happen? What are the bottlenecks?
If I might say something really quick here, I mean, in one way, of course, the bottlenecks are culturally situated because all of us have different governmental structures, different social priorities that make different concepts and ideas challenging on different fronts. I think from the point of view of the presentation I just gave, if I say something very concrete, or give a more concrete proposal of the ways that some things might work, my experience of the culture of Ireland so far is that it's an extremely vocalic culture. It's a culture that values dialogue very much, conversation very much, vocal co-presence very much. But it's very, very rare that the artistic skills base, for example, from theater, we have theater animator specialists who can come in and get conversations going using artistic techniques exactly around the ways that decisions are made to move forward with planning. And those kinds of strategies are often not known about by urban planners, or they're not seen as being part of a design process. They're seen as being part of political formulation, because often design approaches try to work out, this is a caricature of design-based approaches, and not all of them work this way, but often they're trying to work out the best way an end user would make sense of a design or a space of a facility. And what that can lead to, that approach, is that there are lots and lots of voices of end users that are impossible to include in those kind of large overarching dialogues. So if I go down to a sense of feeling, we have an artist in residence right now here who is an autistic theater artist. She thinks that has proposed that one thing that Cork urgently needs is a quiet art space where people who are neurodivergent can visit the city's existing museums, go to existing shows, but have a retreat space where they can go and be away from some of the stimulation that some people with neurodiversity experience, but yet that is still an artistic space, and that says, I am of an equal design status or visual status to, for example, a gallery. And that kind of integration comes from paying attention to the way that some people are going to feel like that and some people aren't, and that there isn't an overarching end user design solution. There's a solution where different communities have to like coexist and rub up against one another. So there's an art, and how could we find that out? We could find that out through running different kinds of dialogue workshops that artists from this domain are already able to animate. That's just one small example of that transition from what can seem a really abstruse concept to a real plan for a real thing in a real place and space. And again, that's very culturally situated in this case.
Thank you, Yvonne. Do our friends from Malmo or Bilbao have anything to offer relating to that? How do you bring people along with you? Or how do you become part of somebody else's vision?
I would actually like to pick up Yvonne's notion of dialogues, because something that we also discuss like regularly is the language that we use in our project, but also just the language as a tool between urban planners and their language, cultural practitioners and citizens. That is, those languages might be very different, and they can be a huge lever in excluding or including certain groups into those projects. It's one thought I wanted to add.
So it's the language that people actually, as you say, don't speak the same language.
Yeah, basically. So that all the long-term urban planning processes, they are talked about and described in words that for the for a citizen, or also cultural practitioners, there's no feeling in it that a cultural practitioner might work with.
Mm-hmm. So it's demystification, really, that's certainly an interpretation of what is really meant, or don't complicate things with language that relates to particular professions.
Exactly, yeah. Or not hiding whatever is happening in very complicated words, but opening it up and making it accessible, basically, for the audience.
Did I see the other hand up there? Linda? No.
Just to add on the conversation, I think that we need to figure out new ways to connect as humans and to share new visions. Sometimes, the spoken words of the administrative process can scare even people that are experts, because it's made in such a way that is cryptic, because it allows only the privileged few to influence it. But I think my experience tells me that we shouldn't waste time trying to change conversations that have their own inertia, and we should try to build our own conversations based on our values and our outcomes, and with new tools. There's different ways to connect with diverse audiences and communities, but at the end, it's all about paying attention to the community's needs. If we try to solve simple things like, okay, you want to use this garden as a barbecue space, okay, let's do an art project that allows us to create a legal framework bubble so we can actually test if we can make a barbecue with the neighbors, no? And I think that is the power of art right now. What we need is to create proofs of concept that are not demolished by this complexity of laws, procedures, and different restrictions that are actually stopping us from imagining and executing better futures. So art is a fantastic Trojan horse to accomplish these things, but education can be also something like that. It could also be a community garden, but at the end, I think it's all about trying to create our own conversation with the people that we think should be involved, and it's all about paying attention to their needs. If we pay attention, we will find people that are already doing the right thing and that need our help. If we pay attention, we'll probably find people that are in risk of displacement and exclusion because of the urban regeneration process, and we can help them try to neutralize things, or we can help the broader public or the public administration see that there are things that happens in the blind spots that are not acceptable for our democracies.
And Karim, in Bilbao, do you have, are the city leaders incorporating your thinking and the thinking of people like you very much in the decision making, or not?
We have, decision makers are very diverse, and there's people who understand the value of what we're doing and help us out from public administration, from private foundations, from academics, from other grassroots organizations like us. But there's other people that have their own inertia. We call it the infrastructure only inertia. So there's this huge machine that mixes a lot of layers of complexity that sees the city as just a place where you can build buildings that give huge profits, and you don't have all these things that are not easy to capture as an economic value in the picture, because they're seen as something as accessory, because they're playing the grown-ups game. And in that sense, it's going to take a while to convince people who are more reluctant to these new approaches that are unstoppable, because not only it's not something that is happening only here, it's happening all over the world, where the cities need new ways to reconnect with the citizens, and we should all be allowed to make the city. We should all be allowed to create new gathering spaces, new community spaces. And so these values will eventually become the mainstream. I have no doubt about it. It might take a year, several years, or decades. And at the end, you can only establish a conversation with people that want to have that conversation. So I said, stay positive, stay constructive, and create the meaningful conversation with people that want to have it with you. Don't waste time having conversations with people that are not trying to understand you, but they're trying to diminish the value of what you're doing.
Well, yeah, that's a lesson for life, Karine. Thank you. Is there anybody, obviously raise your hand if anybody wants to come in and contribute an opinion or a question or drive the conversation. You're all very welcome, because that's what this is. It is a conversation. I'm interested in that concept of, using space and, a place for artistic endeavor and creativity. But I'm just thinking, if I'm redeveloping the Docklands, I'm thinking of what a stevedore needs. I'm thinking of what, the port requirements are. So I'm thinking of the practical economic drivers of a port. So how, again, it seems to me, I don't like the concept of kind of arts and culture being put aside and it's something over there and it's a space and it's a place. But how does it become part of the entire lifeblood? And the question is, what changes do we need to make? Or what conversations can we prompt begin such that that's the outcome, that the artistic, as Yvonne says, that the artistic thinking is there from the beginning?
Well, to get the ball rolling on this complex question, I would say that it is a challenge to find the right balance between the need to planify and the need to experiment, because of course you need to set up a timeline, you need to set up a budget, students need dorms, of course, and that is also, we need planning. But what I'm saying and what I'm making a case for is that we need to fine-tune that planning so that it doesn't kill the innovation potential that we have as citizens, because only the planification, we've tested this for decades and it's not working, it's only getting worse. So we need to create these new spaces. Art is one of them, but it can also be community gatherings. It could be also finding new ways to include new actors in the city making process, and also focusing not only on the infrastructure, but also on what happens in that infrastructure, because we've all seen it. A lot of, and actually European Union funded projects spend millions of euros in making the building, and then they don't have money to do programs in the building, and they start already with this vicious circle. Well, they have this huge infrastructure that they cannot afford, and everything goes into the maintenance of the building, and they barely have money to fit the mission that they were born for in the first place. So these are simple things that we need to start re-questioning. But every infrastructure approach needs, if you want to use the computer analogy, hardware needs software, but culture is software. So we need to think how to embed in the urban regeneration process more participatory approaches, more culture making approaches and community gathering approaches. It could be grants, it could be an artist or a designer in residence, it could be, there's different ways to accomplish it. But what's important is that people who have the power to take decisions, and everybody has those margins of maneuver in their everyday life, they should use those margins of maneuver to create those safe spaces for innovation and experimentation. If we all do it, it will, the cascade effect would be exponential, and it can be also talking about the dorms. Instead of when you do the public procurement for some of the elements of the building, imagine instead of just buying something standard from the cheapest supplier, that you put some local roots conditions, that the furniture is manufactured and co-created with the students that are going to use them, that is locally manufactured by woodworkers that eventually would lose their jobs because their There are workshops that are in the Docklands area will be displaced and they will go bankrupt because of the administrative process. So all these complex things need proofs of concept that then we can gather evidence on. And then once we have the evidence, we can say, okay, this works. Some of them will not work because it's experimental. That is also true. But we need to take seriously that we are living in an era that doesn't have a playbook. We are the generation that has to write the playbook for the next decades.
And I think, Karen, to be honest with you, the proof of concept has already been done over and over again. Being frank. But I am hopeful. We're here. I see Maroon coming in. I'll invite you 1 second, Maroon. But we're in UNIC 2 European University of Post-Industrial Cities. We will have our Centre for City Futures, and that is a whole new way of imagining the engagement with the cities and between the cities. So I think that this might be absolutely like the perfect storm, the perfect opportunity to try and operationalize the concepts that are being discussed here, because the proof of concept is there. You're sitting on a proof of concept for over 10 years now, for example. Maroon, I see your hand up.
Yes, hello everybody. There's 2 points I want to make. One, and not to be sort of contrary to the flow of this discussion, but I want to bring to the group an understanding from a very well established ecological architect named Ken Yang, who actually says that what we actually need is to focus on infrastructure, but in particular to focus on the ecology inside an infrastructure. So this is one concept. And another concept, when I was in Los Angeles, the city was completely becoming derelict. And that was the only time that artists were allowed in. And I feel like right now, this is kind of keeps on happening again. So regarding the ecology of infrastructure, it's really the idea of the sad situation of never really being truly interdisciplinary and vocabularies being very different from one kind of concept or one discipline to the other, and that keeping us living in separate islands. And the other is now with the whole idea of climate change, that we're doing such damage that now all of a sudden we're letting the artist in. So we really need to be critical of the frameworks that we're actually engaging in and not being taken advantage to be heard superficially. That we need to kind of actively work, like what Yvonne is saying about the empty space, like the whole focus that we've been doing with the idea of the wabi-sabi 1 to 100 is to actually only focus on empty spaces and not building connection between things. But though that's not the norm, and we need to change the framework under which development is being thought and heard and implemented. Anyway, I appreciate this is a good forum for it.
Thank you very, very much, Maroon. Lots of thought-provoking ideas there. The ecology of buildings and structures, consider the ecology at the onset. But I think that somehow in my mind incorporates, what Yvonne was saying, relating to how a place feels and so on. Who makes up that place, gives it its complexion, gives it its shape and its form. We talk about, arts, culture, creativity, empowering a sense of identity, belonging, and agency. And we're talking here about regeneration of Docklands. How important, in your collective opinion, is it to have an understanding of what the Docklands were, to have a place within the Docklands region which gives people an understanding of what it was, do you think that that's key or not? In other words, if you were making recommendations for Docklands regeneration, would you say we need to have a place or a space within it where we are paying tribute to what was, engaging in what is, and imagining what could be the future of that space, of that place, i.e. a Docklands? Do I see, is that Aoife's? Oh no, sorry. Do I see any hands? Anybody?
Well, just I would definitely try to make something that is preserving what's already there. So if there are some elements that could be preserved in the most faithful and pedagogical way, it's better to have the whole Docklands area to be an open air museum that just to limit the memory space to one specific warehouse and another museum. The museum experience also has to be revisited as an institution, because it's just becoming another consumer experience. It's not turning people into art. We should be ambitious. Art should aim at turning people into art, and to give them, you know, their tools to deploy their full potential as humans. And I would say that the approach of just creating another space, they did this in this island, and now they're going to move it to another place. I wouldn't do anything that is just mandatory. Let's put a couple of machines and a couple of cranes, and then I would try to you know, you have a good opportunity in this project to try to do it differently, where for start, I would say, let's make the whole area an open air museum. Let's try to preserve the things that are already there and have a value, and if we move them, then we decontextualize them, because the danger of these processes is that you forget who you are as a city, and that is a danger, because it creates a sense of emptiness that then you cannot repair.
Mm-hmm. You spoke about it earlier again with the biscuit factory, the memory. You said there we need to rethink the whole concept of museums. That's a big statement, Karim. You know, it's in other words, I think you're probably considering that it's no longer a go-to place, but somehow an immersive experience, which is place independent or space independent.
I think the problem about every single experience in our age is that everything is a unidirectional consumer experience, even art. So we need people to get hands-on. We need participatory approaches, and I think our Malmo friends can tell us a little bit about participatory approaches. And yeah, sometimes I am a bit more radical with my statements, but it's just to get the fruitful conversation starting.
Oh no, it's very good, very interesting. You certainly have got me interested, Karim. I see Ciara's hand up, and then either Anna or Lynn or both. So Ciara.
Thanks very much, Jean. Yeah, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I love that focus as well, and obviously the participatory and the relational in the spaces, I suppose, between buildings and sort of the spaces between things as well as the things themselves. I'm wondering, from a kind of, again, just in a slightly more concrete perspective, there's been lots of really clear pieces spoken about the kind of use of temporary spaces, the funding mechanisms, events or kind of activities. So I think all of these are really helpful, for example, in sort of policymakers or municipalities as well, in terms of sort of, well, how can we start? And so I'm just wondering if we're thinking of working with the willing and people who are really interested in trying to make support these types of approaches and transformations. And then I'm thinking specifically maybe in a kind of policy type context. And I know this will be very different for each of the three cities, but I'd be really curious to hear each of the speakers maybe a moment of, or something that they would say, oh, this one change would make a difference, or has been something that has made a real difference to us, just as very specifics. I think that would be really useful for the wider learning. Thanks.
Thank you, Ciara. Have any of our contributors a comment to make on what Ciara has proposed there? No, Ciara, you've completely baffled us all.
I can make a comment, but
Yes.
but I'm interested just to hear because I think our Swedish colleagues had a comment before, with your hand up before Ciara's, I think. So you wanted to respond to something earlier in the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. That's why my thoughts are there. But I would be curious, Ciara, as well about the other answers, and then we might get to a concrete idea as well. But what I wanted to come back again was the question of how to preserve the past, prototyping the future while enjoying the present. And thank you, Karim, for bringing that notion in. It made me think of that in the context of Malmö, for example. This is extremely important to work with the past as a tool, because, and it kind of connects to the relational aspect that Ciara brought up now, but working, or like allowing citizens also to understand this journey from using the ocean, living from the ocean, throughout living just by the ocean, to living with the ocean, and in a potential future then maybe living as the ocean, and really living as a coastal city with ocean needs in mind as well. To draw this line kind of, and to allow this cognitive transition through these steps, it needs the past to be there, to be part of it. Yeah. Did you have any thoughts?
No, thank you both very much. Going back to so Ciara, in one sentence, based on what you said there, what specifically is your ask? In other,
I think specifically if, for example, there were some people in municipalities or in other actors in this space who were really interested in supporting these types of approaches. And I think specifically maybe in municipalities and decision makers in municipalities, what one thing would you say could make a real difference to this work that they could contribute, or they could bring to the table?
Thank you, Ciara. And I see Yvonne's hand up, and I also see a hand from Sweden. I don't, is that an old hand? Yeah, thank you. So Yvonne and then Maroon.
Ciara, I would say fund the weeds. So, where we're at in the development of the Cork Harbour area redevelopment, we're in a really early phase of thought. And it would be really interesting, rather than going straight into, well, it's going to happen. There are, processes of urban design going on right now, but it would be really interesting to fund a program of artistically driven experiments that aim to find approaches that grow through the cracks of how urban planning might usually work in these contexts, and that propose new ways of working in this space as it exists for models of where things go. If I'm being, more concrete, I think the market that Karim raised as a starting place for how a project came to be, a market that just grew organically, and that maybe our own marina market is kind of an example of here in Cork. And that is, there's a lot of debate about what's going to happen with that space in the future redevelopment. I think there is a really interesting way of investing small amounts of resource in people's crazy ideas about what the port space could become, as kind of prototyping, as ways of showing urban planners what else could occur in that space than what they might already be thinking of. And I might add to that, if we're talking history, it's really important to me that we really, I know it's annoying and academic, but that we really push histories and the really contrasting pasts of a space. The port space being a historic cruising ground, for example, in Cork, historic cruising ground, probably isn't a concept that someone would build a national museum around.
Yes.
So we also really need to think about all the different stories that exist in a space. Otherwise, What we do in these redevelopment projects is we promote a monolithic version of history that new communities and young people can't see themselves in, because they see them as being a one story rather than currents of stories that braid and interweave with one another. And I think those things cost money. So if I add on to, funding the projects of the weeds, it's really important. Inclusion costs, and it's really important to invest in it.
Mm-hmm. And if we were to speculate, if we were to propose the difference that this type of approach is going to make, and initiatives like you've spoken about in Bilbao and Malmo take place, and there's so many other specific, cultural projects and initiatives and spaces in all our cities, but they're there, as I keep saying, and yet we're still trying to convince people that we need to look at the world through this lens. So what is the difference it makes is what I'm trying to say. In other words, if you say, what are the 5 things? This is the difference. Right now, you're like this as a city. If you apply these approaches, this is how it will be different. What are those things? I mean, I can hazard guesses at it. People will feel more included, more connected, more involved, more free to be creative and innovative. I'm just trying to imagine what are those things so that you can make your presentation to the city leaders and say, this is the difference it will make. Because I presume there's very little baseline surveys and studies done. Like Karim, at the beginning of your project, we'll call it, was there a baseline study done? And now 10 years later, can you say, you can say the impact and the people who've enjoyed and so on, but how it has shaped the city.
Well, to add on this idea that how do we build evidence about things that work, I would say that we're living in a tough moment for evidence gathering, because as a society we cannot distinguish the drinkable water from the poisoned one sometimes. So everything is very subjective. So I would say let's try to pay attention to things that are already there. There's plenty of examples in Europe and worldwide of grassroots spaces that have become cultural institutions and creative lungs of the city. There's an issue about how do you quantify social value that is still not solved, when but at the end urban regeneration is a money talks conversation. So what Yvonne was saying about inclusion, for instance, is absolutely true, but how do we frame this conversation in a way that it cannot be diminished as something not important? Because then when you go to the money talks conversations, all these things are looked like the playground area of urban regeneration instead of being the core. And the thing is, this is a long-term vision thinking. We are still, and every single one of us is in a mental prison that doesn't allow us to invent the cities that we deserve. The models that we're following are perished. There's a lot of things that are good in the city that keep working, but they need fine-tuning. And we need to start saying it as out loud as possible, so that people start gathering and we have enough critical mass to change the conversation. Because if we are waiting for some decision maker that has many problems on the table related with money and other things to make the right move, it's not going to happen. So it's all about people that feel the urge of doing the right thing to gather and help other people that are doing the right thing, so that we get enough critical mass and we make some progress. And I have no idea how we're going to do it, but I can guarantee you it's going to happen.
Thank you, Karim. Maroon, how are we going to do it?
Well, thank you for asking, actually. I think that the first thing we need to do is to actually stop misunderstanding the role of time. I think we really need to think that time is actually an object and not the background to all things. What we really need to do now is actually think on different scales and I agree, I think that the idea of starting really where we are and really small is really, really essential. But we also need to also think at different scales and also very big. I think what we really need in this particular case to have speculative futures and also think of the past as being a speculative past. You know, there isn't one history, there are multiple histories. And if we're not going to make room for this multiplicity of a view of the past, particularly like around the Docklands being kind of a post-industrial approach, like thinking what was the technology that made that place such a focal point? Why did it rise at a certain period in time? And why did it fall? Why did it become derelict? What are some of the urgent needs that the city needs? And how can we contribute towards them? What is really urgent in Cork, for example, including the housing crisis? I think that to actually think of sort of mistakenly think that art is a luxury is also a big problem here. I think why art plays a big role in this case is gives us an opportunity for free thinking, for being able to liberate it from some dogma or some particular scenario planning or thinking. So in this case, it's really changing how we think and thinking on multiple scales with multiple entities to be able to participate right off the bat, not after we do litmus test of whether people get along or we share kind of a view. You know, we need to like allow things that be a playground for many, many types of contemplations and worldviews.
Thank you, Maroon. And you certainly painted a picture of what I would regard as a wonderful future, you know, where it's inclusive. And I think a key thing in all of this, though, I've seen changes. We all have seen changes in our own lives, in our professional lives and personal life. When there's a leadership willingness for something to happen, and when permission is given to people to think as freely as they like to, in an environment where they're not criticized for what they're proposing. And then when you get these disparate and different disciplines coming together, great innovations can take place. And I think that's probably a good point, unfortunately, to draw this to a close based on the time restriction. However, so I feel very optimistic, funnily enough. And I feel very optimistic because now these conversations are taking place. So in my career to date, which spans several decades, conversations weren't taking place around the concept of artistic thinking. Conversations have always taken place around musea, Karim, around galleries, around visual arts, about performance, about film, etc., but not about inculcating that way of thinking into everything we are and do. And also, as we said now, into our planning and ensuring that the spaces and the places of the future are very inclusive and that it is permitted to think, to bring that artistic thinking to the table. So I feel very hopeful, and I'm also very hopeful because of what has brought us together, the Harbour Festival, in conjunction, organised very so expertly by Mehel Mara, in conjunction with University College Cork, as a constituent university of UNIC, the European University of Post-Industrial Cities, already being one of the 44 alliances that's called European University of Post-Industrial Cities. You have the word university and city in the same sentence. And you have the Commission supporting it. We're supporting each other, working in partnership with our cities. We have a plan for UNIC 2. We'll hear whether we'll be funded at the end of this month or not. I'm quite hopeful that we will be. And within it, we will have our Centre for City Futures and a very, very clear thematic area around this entire concept. So we are actioning already what we're articulating around the table here. And I just think, and Maroon mentioned that wonderful 4-letter word, time. With time, things can happen when we start in the right direction. At this juncture, I just want to thank our speakers so much for your outstanding and really, really welcome contributions, very thought-provoking, outstanding work that's being done in Malmo, in Bilbao, and obviously in Cork. I would say that, wouldn't I? But it has really stimulated the conversation, and I'm very hopeful because we're 3 universities, 3 cities of the 10 universities in 10 cities. So we've started this conversation, we can continue it with our partners and hopefully influence and change hearts and minds as we go. Let me also express my gratitude to Ciara O'Halloran and to Martin Galvin, who head out CityLabs so expertly, working in partnership across UNIC as well, and who do Trojan work in this space. And thank the City of Cork, and I want to thank Jeddah. I don't know your last name, Jeddah, but to thank you so much for being very attentive to our needs this morning.
No problem.
And thank all our participants. So I just see, just before the chat, I can see somebody saying, Kareem. Okay, bye-bye. So thank you all very much and have a lovely day and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you and bye.
Thank you.